I'm going to start this talk a little differently, but you're gonna get the same stuff. So in late October of 2008, I was on a business trip to Denver, Colorado. I was going there for a conference and some meetings and things like that. And I had a meeting west of Denver, so I'm driving up into the mountains. I don't know if you guys know that, but Denver's like right on the eastern side of the mountains. If you're gonna go west, you immediately hit mountains. Well, as I'm going up to this one meeting in a town called Evergreen, about 15 miles up, I see this brown sign that says Cabrini Shrine, and I'm like, what's that? You know? And I'm like, all right, well, you know, I just kind of stuck in the back of my mind. And as I go to my meeting up the hill, you know, last couple hours, pretty good meeting, come down the hill, I realize I'm a little bit ahead of schedule, and I see that sign again coming down the other way, and I'm like, well, I don't know, it seems interesting. I got a little time to kill, let me go check it out. And so I pull up, and you got to get off the main interstate, and then you wind up on this old U.S. highway and then onto a town road, and you kind of just climb up this hill. And all of a sudden there's just kind of, you know, a few buildings there and a church and, you know, some other stuff going on there. And I thought, well, this is interesting. So I started kind of poking around, and I saw there was a rosary garden there, and there was like a little chapel, and there was a stairwell, and I could see that there was stuff going up with stairs. I thought, this is cool. So I started, you know, walking around, and it turns out that it's a shrine to St. Frances Xavier Cabrini. And I'm like, I had no idea who this saint was. Never heard of her before at all. And so I'm just there learning. I'm taking it in. And part of the backstory is that this is at a very low point in my life. You know, and I won't go into the details of it, but I mean, it was like one of the lowest points in my life. And I'm just like, you know, kind of starting to kind of pick up the pieces of things. And so it's like at the end of October, like I said, and so I just all of a sudden I just felt this overwhelming sense of peace here. And I start climbing these steps, and it's got the Stations of the Cross, and then beyond the Stations of the Cross, it's got the 20 Mysteries of the Rosary, and it just kind of keeps going up and up and up and up this hill. And I get to the top of the hill, I can see that there's this big statue. I get up there, and there's this giant statue of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, like giant, like it's like over 20 feet tall on a pedestal. So this thing's enormous. And as you know, as you're going along, there's little placards and things like that. So I start reading about, you know, St. Frances Xavier Cabrini, and you know, just like I said, it was just kind of this peaceful place. And I'm like, you know, I wish I would have built some time into my trip to really spend some time here. And I was kind of like, but I had no idea the place existed. So I'm like, okay, next time I come to Colorado, I'll do this. And when I came down the hill, but before I went to my car, like I said, there was a little rosary garden there, and there's this chapel. I stepped into the chapel, and I think there's a picture of it in here. Yeah, if you look on page 79 in the upper left corner, that's what the inside of this little chapel looks like. And you can see that there's all these candles. There's just a zillion candles there to the statue of St. Frances Xavier Cabrini. So this is like on a Wednesday, right? And I'm supposed to fly home on Sunday morning. Well, the conference I went to, I had some other meetings. The conference I went to actually got done early. And so it got done about noon on Saturday. I wasn't expecting it to. I thought I was gonna have to do stuff until the evening. So I'm like, hey, boom, I'm going back. And so I got in the car and I drove, you know, it was probably about a 20-minute drive, half-hour drive. I went back, and I spent just an incredible afternoon exploring this shrine. And like I said, there's this chapel. I spent some time praying there. I was walking around towards the Rosary Garden, and there was this like sink. Okay, it's like a trough sink with several spigots coming out. I'm like, what is this? And there's a plaque there that said, on this date, I can't remember the date. It was like in 1904 or 1907. Frances Xavier Cabrini, Mother Cabrini, because she was the head of a religious order, was building this place, and she struck a rock, and water came out because they needed water at this place. So she struck a rock with like a stick, and water started coming out. I'm like, what? You know, kind of like Moses, right? Striking the staff against the rock, and water comes out. So I'm like, I got to get to know this saint. So while I'm there, I go to the gift shop. Because every shrine's got a gift shop, right? So you can get books, and you can get all this other kind of stuff. And when I was there, I bought this picture right here. I don't know if you guys probably can't see it. but it's a picture of Francis Xavier Cabrini. And, you know, I'm like, okay, I got a picture of a nun, you know, and didn't know what I was kind of getting myself into. But the other thing that I bought is I bought a crucifix, and it had like kind of beads and things like that on it. And I just felt like it's such a piece. I said, I just feel really called to buy this crucifix. So I bought it, I put it on, and I hadn't worn one ever, right? Or if I did, it was like on a really long chain down inside my shirt, nobody was gonna see it, all right? But this thing's like right here, right in my throat. And I'm like, okay, so then I go and I had to drive back from Denver down to Colorado Springs where my plane was flying out on Sunday morning. And I get up, get on the plane, and I'm walking in the airport, and I'm like, I am going into public wearing a crucifix around my neck. This is not feeling good all of a sudden. Somebody's gonna challenge me on this, somebody's gonna push my buttons, you know, something's gonna happen. And that morning I got bumped up to first class. I mean, on a Sunday morning, there aren't many people, right? I mean, literally on this plane that holds like 150 people, there's like 9 people. So they bumped anybody who was a frequent flyer up to first class. I'm sitting in row 1, seat B. So I'm sitting right in the aisle. And so how many of you guys have flown before? All right, most of you guys. When you get in there, right, what do the flight attendants do? They do the flight attendant aerobics, right? You know, they're pointing out the exits, they're doing all that kind of stuff. Well, the flight attendant, she's literally standing like me to that laptop away, and I'm sitting down and she's standing right there, and she's doing all this kind of stuff, and all of a sudden she looks at me and she goes, just kind of mouths the words, I like your crucifix. I mean, of all the things to say to me, right? God gave me the consolation of exactly what I needed to hear, because I was worried that, oh my goodness, I'm gonna start something here. And this woman, yet she affirmed what I was doing. And from that moment, I never looked back. Okay, it was like, all right, this is the right thing to do, because I was like, this is really weird. So anyway, so I started to learn more about this Francis Xavier Cabrini, and it turns out that she was born in Italy in about 1850, and born in a little town. Again, geography lesson. Milan is kind of in northern Italy. So if you've got, you know, the boot of Italy here and Switzerland's right here, Milan's like between Switzerland and the coast. It's kind of in the north part of Italy. And so that's where she's born. From a very young age, you know, she kind of exhibited, you know, kind of an affinity towards, you know, kind of prayer and things like that. Her mom was like super religious, right? Her mom would get up early in the morning. She was the youngest of 13 kids, okay? So like her older sisters, you know, and things like that were helping take care of her. Yeah.
Her mom or her, was her mom?
Frances was the youngest of 13 kids.
Oh, wow.
But her mom would get up really early in the morning because she would spend an hour in prayer, and she would go to daily mass. And then in the evening, she would spend another hour in prayer. So 13 kids, and she's doing all this, okay? So her father was also very religious. And she had a couple of sisters that were very, very religious as well. And so they said it was highly unlikely that she would not turn out to have a strong Catholic faith. But she was also born 2 months early, okay? So that in 1850, it's not like now where if a baby's born 2 months early, you know, they spend a little bit of time in the you know, the NICU or something like that, and then they're good to go, right? And the survival rate was really high. In those days, if you were born early, you probably weren't going to make it. Okay. So anyway, so she was born early, and so for a lot of her life, she was kind of small, kind of sickly, right? So she wasn't in the best of health all the time. But again, she from a young age knew that she wanted to do something in religious life. She, like her dolls, she dressed them all as nuns. Okay, and she was going to a Catholic school that was taught by nuns, so her heroes were the nuns, her mentors were the nuns. And she knew also that she wanted to travel the world. She wanted to be a missionary, and so she had learned about this guy whose name was Francis Xavier Cabrini, and it's like, hey, you know, that's a guy with the same name as me, right? Or excuse me, she learned about Francis Xavier. That was the saint's name. Her last name was Cabrini. And he was a missionary too, and she's like, this guy was a missionary. He went to Japan. He wanted to go to China. She's like, I want to go to China too. I want to be a missionary, go to China. So there was a story where she was 8 years old, and her parents sent her to her uncle's house, who was a priest, and she was staying with him. And she would make these little boats, out of various things of wood and things like that. And she'd take violets and she'd stick them in there, and the violets were the people, and she would take these boats and she would set them in the canal and they would float downstream. And she was like, this is me sending out my missionaries. Okay, so she's 8 years old, right? And so she's already thinking in these terms. Well, one day, she wasn't watching what she was doing, and she fell in the canal. And there was kind of a swift current, and a little further down the stream, there was like a drainage tunnel. And basically it said if she would have gotten sucked into that thing, she would have drowned. Well, anyway, all of a sudden she's in this canal, and the next thing she knows, she finds herself laying on the shore, and someone runs and gets her uncle. He comes back and he says, how did you get out of that? She goes, I don't know, somebody pulled me out. And she goes, well, did you see who it was? And she said, no. And nobody else in the area saw who it was either. He said, it must have been your guardian angel that pulled you out. So she was saved miraculously, assumed to be saved miraculously, because there was nobody in the area that was there to take credit for that. And so her uncle's like, you got to stay away from the canal, it's so dangerous, okay? You got to stay away from water, okay? So she kind of developed this fear of water. So if she's going to be a missionary in these days, right, you got to get on a boat and go somewhere. But now she's afraid of water, all right? So that's kind of incompatible with each other. So anyway, so she is, she continues her education. One of her older sisters named Rose is the one who kind of is the one that's mentoring her the most. Rose is a little strict with her, but it wasn't like she was mean, right? She was just strict. So she would like take her hair and she would pull it back really tight and tie it about her head and things like that. Rose was actually a very, very good older sister to her. She was just stricter, okay? That was just the way she was. But Frances, she just wanted to please Rose. Okay, she looked up to her. Rose was her hero, and she just like, I just want to do well so I can, Rose will feel good about me. And so, as she got done with school, she did start becoming involved in religious life. Without going into a million details about it, she did start working toward joining an order. But it turned out that the woman that was running that order was a very worldly woman, and actually one of the priests said, I don't think you want to join that order. She's insane. Okay, and what are you going to do if she asked you to jump down the well? And Frances, who at this point was like, she understood the hierarchy of these orders. She goes, if she asks me to jump down the well, I'll do it. Okay, so the priest realized that she had a very high sense of duty and obedience to what she was being asked to do. And so eventually, that order started kind of falling away, but Frances kind of had a following of a few nuns, maybe 6 or 7 nuns, and she kind of started forming this little group, and they started teaching. She wound up going to this one town. She was going to be there for 2 weeks. She wound up staying for 2 years to teach. Okay, and then she went to another town, and she was going to work with children, and she was just going there for a couple weeks. She stayed there for 6 years. Okay, and these other nuns, they just kind of started gathering around her, or I shouldn't say nuns, they were novices, so they hadn't done their orders, but they all were going to be nuns, and so she kind of rose as the leader of them, and they were like, yeah, we really want to do what she's asking us to do. And so they started working with children and teaching them. They started working in orphanages, right? And eventually the bishop in the area said, I want your group to go start an orphanage in a school, because he saw what was going on, and they were really into this, and they were really trying to do well at it. And so they did. Okay, and as more and more people grew up, kind of gained onto this group that they had, the bishop asked them to start more of these things. So many so that by the time she was 30 years old in 1880, they were like, you need to go to the Pope and start a religious order. Okay, and she's like, okay, and so she was trying to figure out how to do this. Well, apparently it was pretty easy. Pope Leo XIII was elected Pope in 1878, and apparently there was pretty easy access to him. He was a pretty likable guy. And she did wind up eventually seeing Pope Leo XIII, and before she saw him, though, she wrote down the rules for her order and gave them to her bishop. Her bishop showed them to the Pope, and the Pope saw these, and he was so impressed with them, he just said, approve them. He was so excited, and so he without even having met her, he saw what she was going to do with this order, and he says, I want this approved. And so she did. Right away, this thing got approved. And so eventually she did wind up seeing the Pope, and she was like, you know, I really feel like I'm called to go to China. And the Pope said, you know, that's a good call, but he says, I've got a different mission for you. And Frances kind of went there, and she said, you know, whatever the Pope asked me to do, I'm going to do with this order. And so the Pope said, I don't want you to go to China. I don't want you to go east. I want you to go west. I want you to go to the United States, because a lot of Italians were immigrating to the United States at that point in time, and they were being treated really poorly over here. They'd come here looking for a better life, and they were living in abject poverty. And people they were like one of the persecuted groups of people, right? People saw they're Italian, they're like, you're no good because you're Italian, which, as we know, is just ridiculous, right? We don't think about people that way, but that's what they did at the time. And so, so she's like, okay, this is what you want me to do, this is what I'm going to do. So by 1889, she and like 5 or 6 of her sisters, they got on a ship, right? Remember, she's afraid of water, right? She's not going to go, but she still knew she wanted to be a missionary. She said, all right, this is what I'm doing. She gave, at that moment that the Pope said that, she gave up her wishes of being a missionary to China, knowing that the Pope wanted her to go to the United States. So she gets on the boat, and again, remember, she was kind of sickly and stuff like that. She got on the boat, and the sea air just worked wonders. She felt really good above deck. The other nuns were, you know, seasick, and they're below decks, and they're, you know, they're throwing up and stuff like that. And she's above deck, and she's just like, I've never felt this good before in my life. And so she's up on the deck, and she's writing. And when some of the other nuns felt better, they were singing, and they were singing hymns and all this kind of stuff. And they make it to the New World, and they land in New York, right, which is where most of the immigrants came in through New York, through Ellis Island. You guys probably learned that in your history class. And they wound up in, again, I don't know if you know Manhattan well, they wound up having arrangements made for them that they were going to stay at a place at about 59th Street, okay? The streets run this way, avenues run this way. And so about 59th Street, which, if you know New York City, it's very close to Central Park. Okay. Well, when they got there, all of a sudden the place that they had made arrangements for said no. And they were like all of a sudden homeless in this new country. And they got a hold of the bishop there, and the bishop said, I got a place for you. He took them to another place, and they started working there. And immediately they didn't have anything, so they would literally go out in the streets and beg for money. They had their habits on, and they would go out and they would beg, and that's how they got money for starting the things they're going to start. And eventually, you know, the churches there and the bishop there got them some money to be able to kind of keep going, but they still lived in a lot of poverty. But at this time, and actually a couple times in Europe before they had left, they started noticing some strange things happening, right? There was a time when, you know, they're Italian, right? And they would have wine at each meal, and they didn't have any wine. And they had already borrowed some wine from this one, I guess not liquor store, but this one supplier there. And he was, she sent this nun there to get the wine, the guy said, well, you already owe us money, so we're not going to give you any wine. And she comes back and she talks to Mother Cabrini, and she said, well, how much do they want? And she said, well, they want like $40, right, for the wine. I don't know, she said 40 lira. So maybe this was one that happened in Italy. They want 40 lira. And she said, well, how much do you have? She says, I have a few pennies that I begged. She goes, well, check your pockets and see what you got. And she reaches in her pockets and she empties everything out of her pockets. I just got a few coins. And she goes, are you sure? Check again. You know, and at that moment, Mother Cabrini, she kind of prays and she looks up at the statue of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And the sister's like, yeah, nothing in here. And she's starting to get a little annoyed at first. She goes, are you sure? I mean, are you really sure there's nothing in there? And she reached in her pocket and she pulled out 2 20 lira notes out of her pocket. And she was like really worried that Mother Cabrini was going to be mad, thinking that she was holding back on her. And she's like, no, it's fine. Just go out and get the wine. And you must just not have looked hard enough, is what she would say to people. And so she went out to the place where they were going to get the wine. The amount of money covered what they needed and some extra. And the owner of the place said, well, if you can do that kind of thing, I'll just give you a whole bunch more. And so he gives them a whole bunch of wine so they have it with their meals and things. Same thing happened once when they had a storeroom and they had bread in it. And all of a sudden they went up there and all they found was a few stale crusts. And she goes, well, go check again. And the nuns went up there and there was a room full of bread. And she goes, well, you just must not have looked hard enough. Meanwhile, they're going, this is a miracle. I know what I saw. There was nothing in there. And then I went back and it was full. This is a miracle. And she's like, no, it's just, you just must not have looked hard enough. And that's how she just kind of phrased it, because she didn't want any of this to come back to her. And so they, within a couple of years, they were having a lot of success. I mean, they weren't like rich success, but they were having a lot of success in setting up the orphanages. They had like 300 kids, right? And so they were begging for money so they could get food, to supply food for 300 orphans in New York. And I think it was the Archbishop there said that the Pope had contacted him, and they wanted her to go back to Italy because the Pope wanted to talk to her. So she gets on a ship and she goes back to Italy. And this is a bigger deal then than it is now, right? If we were going to go to Italy, I mean, we'd still need to pay for it, but we could get on a plane and we could be there in about 8 hours. She had to be on a ship for like 7 to 10 days just to get where she was going. And so the Pope is like, I need you to start in some other places too. I need, this is working. He's like, we're going to start branching out to other cities. While she was on the ship on one of these trips, she met a woman from Nicaragua, and this woman was a rich woman. And she says, I want you to start something down here as well. And so all of a sudden she's starting to travel like crazy, right? Remember, she's afraid of water, right? She's not in very good health, but she's starting to go around. It turns out that by the end of her life, she crossed the Atlantic like 22 times. Okay, but she was never so at peace and feeling so healthy as when she was on the ship. But there were stories of her, and she set up schools and orphanages and hospitals and stuff like that across the country. And they said in the United States alone, I think it was 67 institutions between orphanages and hospitals and schools. And so Denver was one of these places. She set up a convent. Is what this place originally started at, where I wound up. There was a convent there. She started things in Chicago. There's a whole place down in Chicago. There's a Cabrini shrine in Chicago right now. And but in other places, like I said, Nicaragua, down in Central America, there's stories in this book. This is a really good book I picked up at the Cabrini shrine in New York when I went there. And this talks about, there's stories in here of her crossing the Andes Mountains on an alpaca, right? This little nun, who's not in great health. I'll get to you in a second. Not in great health. She's crossing the Andes on an alpaca, right? Because she's going to go to Argentina. She's just all over the place. And she's starting these orders, and by this time there's hundreds and hundreds of these nuns, and so they would take them back. And initially they would take them back to Italy to do their vows, but then they set that up in New York because otherwise they were always going back and forth across the ocean just to take their vows. But she started all this stuff. And so there was a place in New York where they bought it. And again, on Manhattan Island, it's a kind of a long, thin island. Way up in the northern part of the island, there was a group of, I think they were Jesuits, and they were selling this property because, they didn't have good water and they just wanted to get a different place. So she bought it for a song. And she knew that this is the place they were supposed to be. She said, this is the place that I'm going to die. This is the place where my bones will rest. And so she was checking the property out, and she says, I know there's water here somewhere. So she's looking for a place where there's like a concentration of moisture. And she found a place, and she ordered a well to be dug there, and this was the place where the best water was on the property. So she had these miracles that were attributed to her even while she was alive. Again, she was sickly, and so she wasn't going to live forever. By the time she was about 67 years old in 1917, she did pass away in December of that year. But she was canonized by like the late 40s. Okay, they realized that she had made some great contributions to the faith, and so she was a saint by then. And so again, you may see this name Cabrini in various places across the country. If you ever go on a backpacking trip with me and we wind up going through Colorado, we always stop at that shrine. It's a really cool place. I don't know, when there's a chance, a couple of years, we might even go to New York. We're talking about maybe a mission trip to New York at some point. That was pre-COVID, so we'll see what happens. But we might go to that shrine as well. But Francis, I think St. Francis has been responsible for a lot of my reversion back to the faith, because she's just kind of always been there for me. And right here, a friend of mine about a year ago knew that I had this devotion to Francis, and she gave me a first-class relic of her. So this is like a bone fragment of her right there. I guess let me get you guys in a second, okay? This is a bone fragment of hers, and so I've got some prayer cards for you guys. If you want to touch the prayer cards of this when we're done, you can make your prayer card a third-class relic of that. And so we do relics like this because, it helps us feel as if the saint is with us. So to give you an example, we lost our dog about a month ago, and one of the things that we did when he died is we clipped a little bit of his fur off and put it in a baggie. It wasn't like, we were thinking it had any magical powers or anything like that, but we wanted that tactile, that physical reminder of him. And that's what relics are, okay? Now relics are a bit different because there actually are miracles that happen because of these. And I can kind of go into the whole spirituality part of it, but think about it this way. We are beings made up of flesh and soul. And so that's our mixture. Once we die, the soul leaves our body, but there's still that connection between the body and the soul, right? It doesn't animate the body, but we believe that still when we have a relic like this, that the saint is present to us, okay? So that's why it can be really powerful when you have a relic like that, okay? But I would encourage you guys to get to know Mother Cabrini. She's had a really big impact on my life. And I really feel like she could have an impact on yours as well. Questions? JJ, you had one.
So how long did it take her to reach the Andes Mountains with the alpaca?
I don't know. In the book it kind of goes into it, but I mean, she was traveling on a ship and then she'd go inland and then they would go up over the Andes. She was probably crossing the Andes over a couple of weeks. I mean, even now, if you were going to take that trip, it would take a while because the Andes are pretty significant mountains.
My dad is a relic of a saint, and what's an alpaca?
Alpaca's like a llama,
A llama?
that type of thing, kind of. It's like a South American llama.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, like I said, I got a prayer card for each of you guys. They are blessed. Like I said, if you do want to make it a relic, all you do is you just kind of walk up, you take it, you touch, just gently touch it to there, and that makes it a third-class relic. Okay. We're going to do another reflection like we did before. So if you guys have your journals, you want to get those out. Like I said, I'm going to read a short thing, and then I want to have you guys spend some time reflecting on it. For those of you that are present here, you also would have the opportunity to go to confession. Father Rob is in the confessional. I would encourage you to listen to the story, maybe think about it. And if you want to be in line over there, you can take your journal over there, and we can, you can do that. But I would encourage you to spend a little time kind of thinking about this story. All right. So if you want to put a title on it, so like I encouraged you guys to do last time, if you want to turn to a new page, if you want to start a little, skip a couple lines, you put today's date on there. It's January 27th. If you want to put a name for this reflection, you could put, and I'll spell it for you, but it's called Punchinello the Wemmick. So I'll definitely spell that for you. So Punchinello is someone's name. It's Punchinello. Punchinello. the Wemmick, the, T-H-E, Wemmick, and you'll know what that, you'll understand what that means in a minute. It's W-E-M-M-I-C-K. And you'll notice some parallels to this story of another story you might know. But I found this was a really powerful story, and there's definitely a deep-seated message in here that, after I read it, I'm just going to kind of step away. I want you guys to spend some time just kind of thinking about the message there and reflecting on it, all right? And then what we're going to do is, I believe we're going to have music tonight at the end, so about 7:30 or so, that's what we'll do at the end. Otherwise, we'll just continue reflecting and doing confession, all right? All right, so just take a moment and just kind of be here in the moment. If you're not with me, kind of get with me now. This story is about a group of wooden people called the Wemmicks. The Wemmicks all had two boxes. One contained gold stars and the other gray dots. They spent their entire day walking around and giving one another either stars or dots. The Wemmicks, who were pretty and didn't have scratches on their wood, were given stars. The ugly ones were given dots. Stars were earned for being talented and for knowing big words. Punchinello was one of the Wemmicks who got a lot of dots. He tried to jump high, but he always fell. And when he fell, he'd be given a dot. Sometimes falling scratched his paint, so he got another dot for that. He got so many dots that Wemmick started giving him dots for no reason at all. They would say that he deserved all those dots, that he wasn't a good Wemmick. Punchinello agreed with them and began to spend time with other Wemmicks who had a lot of dots. He felt better around them. One day, Punchinello met a Wemmick who was different from any other he had ever seen. She didn't have any dots or stars. Sometimes people would come up to her and try to put a star or a dot on her, but they would just fall off. Punchinello was amazed and asked her why the dots and stars didn't stick. "It's easy," she said. "Every day I go to see Eli. Why don't you go and see him? Go find out for yourself." Punchinello was afraid that Eli wouldn't want to see him, but he finally mustered enough courage to go to Eli's workshop. When he entered the workshop, he heard a deep, strong voice call his name. "Punchinello?" "How do you know my name?" asked Punchinello. Eli told him, of course he knew his name. He had made Punchinello. Eli stooped down and picked him up. He noticed all of the dots on his body and commented on them. "I didn't mean to get all of those bad marks," Punchinello said. "Oh, you don't have to defend yourself to me, child. I don't care what the other Wemmicks think. You shouldn't either. Who are they to give stars or dots? They're Wemmicks, just like you. What they think doesn't matter, Punchinello. All that matters is what I think, and I think you're pretty special." Punchinello laughed. "Me? Special? Why? I can't walk fast, I can't jump, my paint is peeling. Why do I matter to you?" Eli looked at Punchinello, put his hands on those small wooden shoulders, and spoke very slowly. "Because you're mine. That's why you matter to me. The stickers don't stick on your friend because she has decided that what I think is more important than what they think. The stickers only stick if you let them. The more you trust my love, the less you care about their stickers. You are special because I made you, and I don't make mistakes."